Hello everyone again, and welcome to the second lecture of the fall 2021 series of Speaking from the Margins, organized by the database of Byzantine Book Epigrams. My name is Julian Bertola, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at Ghent University, affiliated to the database of Byzantine Book Epigrams. Today's lecture is by Simon Zuenelli on the ancient legacy of the Byzantine Book Epigram. Dr. Simon Zuenelli is assistant professor at Innsbruck University in Austria and chief editor of the review journal Anzeiger für die Altertumswissenschaft. His research focuses on post-classical Greek poetry. He authored several contributions on Nonnus Dionysiaca and is currently preparing a monograph on the Ancient Greek Book Epigram. He also organized earlier this year, in June, the online workshop, The Ancient Greek Book Epigram in Context, in which DBBE, the database of Byzantine Book Epigram, was present through our own Christoffel de Moon, who delivered a paper there. So before continuing, please be aware that the session will be is being recorded, and will be later available through the DBBE YouTube channel, where you can also find the previous lectures. I will ask you to keep your questions for the end of the talk and formulate them either through the chat or raising your virtual hand after raising your virtual hand or your actual hands. And that would be all for now. So please, Simon, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for your kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. And I also like to thank the organizers for giving me the chance to present some of my research today. And I'm going to share my desktop with you, trying to show my presentation. Can everybody see the presentation? Yes, okay, oh great. So, dear colleagues, as the database of Byzantine book epigrams effectively reveals, the production of book epigrams was a popular phenomenon in Byzantine Middle Ages. Yet, as we all know, the book epigram is not a Byzantine invention, but a genre rooted in a long tradition going as far as the Hellenistic period, as far back as the Hellenistic period. Indeed, I'm currently preparing a monograph examining the ancient Greek book epigram as a distinctive epigrammatic genre. As a literary critic, I'm mainly interested in the literary book epigram, and in particular in its role as a vehicle for meta-literary discussion. So I'm more interested in book epigrams as texts, which figured among other types of epigrams in ancient epigram books, and less in the paratexts. But these fictional book epigrams may be purely literary, but they do still pretend to be book inscriptions. Hence, understanding the actual book context is key for their correct interpretation. Therefore, I've spent quite some time investigating the practical function of book epigrams as paratexts as well, and I'm happy to share some of my results with you today. In this paper, I'd like to draw attention on the continuity in the ancient and Byzantine book epigram tradition and emphasize the ancient legacy of the latter. Given the limited time scope at my disposal, I can only address some key features. As a basis for my selection, I took the chapter Byzantine Book Epigrams by Floris Bernard and Christophe Demoun, published 2 years ago in Brill's Companion to Byzantine Poetry, which is probably the most concise and up-to-date overview on the matter. From there, I've picked 3 different aspects which the authors considered crucial to the Byzantine book epigram production and analyzed them further. Hence, in what follows, I will firstly deal with the continuity on a generic level. To this end, the type of the ancient scribe-related epigram will be discussed. Secondly, I'll address the aspect of textual fluidity or textual recycling, which is so typical for the Byzantine book epigram. Thirdly, I'll highlight the close relationship between the ancient and the Byzantine book epigram concerning the visual representation. I very much hope this program meets your interests. Let's start with the continuity on a generic level. In relation to the Byzantine book epigrams, Floris Bernard and Christophe Demoun identify 5 main categories, being the author-related, the patron-related, the scribe-related, the reader-related, and finally, the text-related book epigram. All of these genres have ancient precursors, although the relevant evidence widely vary. Among them, the scribe-related epigram strikes me as particularly interesting as it constitutes the largest corpus among Byzantine book epigrams. Moreover, this genre is known for being the most topical and formulaic. Apparently, some of these anonymous formulae have been passed on from book to book with only little or no alternations. Hence, some types of scribal epigrams may have originated centuries before their first attestation in a medieval codex. This, I think, makes the scribe-related epigram particularly suitable for our discussion. Unfortunately, the evidence concerning the ancient scribe-related epigram is very scarce. However, we have reason to believe that some popular Byzantine epigram types go back to antiquity. This hypothesis has long been suggested, for example, by Courtois in the 70s of the last century. In his article Der Schreiber am Ziel, the scholar examined the famous book epigram type, which compares the completion of a manuscript to a sailor's return after a long journey. Renard Meesters mentioned it the last lecture in this series as well. Epigram is to be found in numerous different tokens, among which the one in the Codex Vaticanus Palatinoscript 44 is the earliest instance. The Codex is dated to the year 898 and was executed by Leon the Tabularius of Monemvasia. The text reads as follows: As pleasant a calm harbour is to the sailor, so too is the last line to the copies. Yet, there exists a Latin version of the epigram as well, which figures in an Augustine manuscript executed in Luxeuil more than 250 years earlier, that is, in 625. It goes, as the sailor, returning from the sea, rejoiceth at seeing the harbour, so too does the scribe, after penning the last line. Of course, it is unlikely that the Byzantines adopted the epigram from the Latin West during the so-called Dark Ages. Therefore, Courtois rightly suggested that both epigrams are rooted in a common ancient tradition. Hence, the example provides important evidence that even one of the most popular Byzantine scribal epigrams doesn't have a Byzantine origin at all. In light of this, we may well speculate that other popular scribe-related epigrams are inherited from antiquity as well, even though we will probably never know for sure. There is, however, some evidence that the genre of scribal epigram goes back as early as the 3rd century BC. Witness for this is a book scroll containing Menander's comic play The Sicyonians, dated to the last third of the 3rd century BC and now kept at the Institut de Papyrologie de la Sorbonne at Sorbonne. As the stichometric annotations indicate, the manuscript has been executed by a professional scribe working on commission. At the end of the papyrus scroll, and clearly separated from the text, main text, 3 lines in the iambic trimeter are inscribed, and you can see them here. Unfortunately, the text is very fragmentary. According to George Parasoglu, whose reading is widely accepted today, the lines constitute 2 separate poems of 2 and 1 line respectively. And his text is the following. Do not laugh at my writing. Of who is laughing the leg? And the next one, how sweet it is to give the 3 fingers a rest. The narrative voice uttering the 3 lines seem to be the copyist, the scribe copying the book scroll. In the first 2 lines, he appears to apologize for the bad execution of the manuscript, which, to be fair, is indeed a bit sloppy. If the reading skelos is correct, the scribe's leg played an important role in his argumentation. Probably, he pointed to the fact that someone who has not experienced the physical pains, especially in the legs, during the copying process, should refrain from criticizing hastily. In the 3rd line, only the word anepausa can be read with a fair degree of certainty. However, as there are quite some Byzantine book epigrams describing the completion of a manuscript as giving the 3 fingers a rest, Parasoglu's textual supplements must be taken seriously. If they are correct indeed, the papyrus is the first instance of the 3 fingers motif, which shall become so popular in the centuries to come. Yet, be it as it may, in light of the copyist's prominent role, the Sorbonne papyrus may well be considered the first instance of a scribe-related epigram in the ancient Greek world. In what follows, I would like to discuss another poem, which indicates that ancient and Byzantine scribes ventilated similar preoccupations in their epigrams. As we all know, Byzantine verse colophons often reflect on the enormous physical labor that went into the transcription of books. As the working environment of ancient copyists the working environment for ancient copyists was not much different from that of their Byzantine colleagues, we might not be surprised to find an epigram like the following, offered by a certain Opithius complaining about his hard job as a proofreader. The epigram is not to be found in situ, but in the 9th book of the Palatine Anthology. Originally, however, it was inscribed on a copy of Herodian's Universal Prosody. Before turning to the epigram itself, let's first consider the lemma added to it in the Palatine Anthology, which is particularly instructive. By Opithius from Athens, who punctuated the Universal Prosody. What we learn is that the epigram was authored by a certain Opithius from Athens, who, unfortunately, is otherwise unknown. The lemma goes on in specifying that the lines refer to Opithius' punctuation of the universal prosody, written in the 2nd century CE by the famous grammarian Aelius Herodianus. The Catholike Prosodia was Herodian's main grammatical treatise, and often simply referred to as He Catholu, the universal. Unfortunately, the original work has gone lost, and we have to rely on later epitomai. In its original form, however, it comprised 20 books, mainly containing rules for the correct accentuation of Greek words and offering about 60,000 examples in total. As Herodian dedicated to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, we are provided a precise terminus postquem for the epigram. As the lemma specifically refers to punctuation of the manuscript, we may conclude that Opithius was not responsible for the actual copying of the text, but for adding diacritical signs to the plain text. An intellectually more demanding job, which required active thinking. His job might be best compared with that of a modern proofreader. In the case of grammatical treatises or compendia like Herodian's Universal Prosody, punctuation mainly consisted in supplementing dots or horizontal strokes to mark the grammatical items in question. Today, we would use inverted commas in such cases. Considering the approximately 60,000 examples listed in Herodian's treatise, the task must have been tiring and physically demanding. Hence, we can easily understand Opithius' complaint. Oh, for the number of rules all saying the same thing, and scarcely visibly scratches the work of my fine pen. My eyes ache, my wrist, my back, my neck and shoulders, and I feel universally the pain of the universal. Like the two examples discussed so far, also Opithius' epigram focus on the physical labor connected to the transcription of a manuscript. However, despite its topical subject, Opithius' poem owns a strong individualistic note, as describes physical discomfort is ironically linked to the title of Herodian's treatise. In my view, there is another aspect which makes Opithius' epigram interesting, and that is the question: where does the information provided by the lemma in the Greek anthology come from? As you may have noted, Opithius' name and hometown aren't mentioned in the text. Neither is a clear clue offered to help associating Opithius' work with the practice of inserting punctuation. So, where does all the information come from? In my opinion, the most plausible explanation is that originally the epigram was written next to a subscription recording Opithius' punctuation of the manuscript. The use of such subscriptiones can be traced back as early as the 2nd century CE. Our evidence is mainly based on the Latin tradition, but attested for the Greek East as well. The known Latin subscriptiones are rather formulaic. They record the proofreader's name and often also the location where the proofreading took place. Let me give you an example. After checking his copy of Macrobius' commentary on Cicero's Somnium Scriptionis, Aurelius Memmius Symmachus, who was consul in 485, penned down the following subscription: I, Aurelius Memmius Symmachus, Vir Clarissimus, revised and punctuated my copy in Ravenna. Hence, it is very likely that beside his humorous epigram, Pythius also wrote a subscriptio recording his punctuation of the manuscript, which provided the information collected in the lemma. To sum it up, ancient evidence concerning the use of scribe-rated epigrams is very low and doesn't allow to draw a clear picture. However, as my analysis showed, the scribe-rated epigram was definitely not a Byzantine invention, but existed centuries before. Concluding from the extant examples, the physical endeavor linked to the copying activity was a crucial motive already present among the ancient scribal epigrams. In the next section of my paper, I'd like to shift the focus from the question of subject matter to that of authorship. There are several book epigrams extant in the Palatine anthology which have been authored by well-known poets. The earliest examples are composed by Hellenistic epigrammatists like Asclepiades or Callimachus. But ancient poets continued to be interested in the genre also after its heydays in the 3rd century BC. In the 6th century CE, for example, Agathias appended a book epigram to his own epic poem Daphnica, something that Nonnus perhaps did to his Dionysiaca some time before. However, if we turn from the highbrow book epigrams to less professional products, the concept of authorship starts to become difficult. In this context, I'd like to quote again a passage from Bernard and Demoun describing the problem of textual fluidity, which goes, authorship is a difficult and blurry concept when applied to book epigrams, since they are subject to various processes of appropriation, recycling, compilation, and adaptation. Quote end. However, the phenomenon described here is not unique to the Byzantine book epigram production, but attested before, as I'd like to demonstrate with my next example. The epigram in question figures in a first century CE book roll kept in the British Museum and containing book 3 and 4 of Homer's Iliad. At the end of the book scroll, an additional, mostly blank sheet has been added. And the sheet, relevant sheet is this one, has been added. It contains quite a number of coronides sprinkled over the blank space. So a coronis, as you all might know, is an editorial sign, originally in the shape of a bird, which indicated that a book that we are at the end of a book. And moreover, and more importantly, an almost obliterated epigram in iambic trimides can be found there as well. The text you see is that of Albert Wistrand, which is a revised version of the manifestly wrong transcription offered by Milne in the catalogue of the literary papyri in the British Museum. And the text runs, I am Coronis, guardian of letters. The reed wrote me down the right hand and the knee. If you lend me to someone, take another book in exchange. If you soil me, I will slander you to Euripides. Keep away. The text is spoken by a Coronis, visible on the epigram's lower left side. So here you can see the Coronis in a very strange form. She wants any potential user of the manuscript neither to lend the book to anyone, unless precautions are taken, nor to soil it. Otherwise, she would slander the crime to Euripides. The text, as fascinating it may be, also raises a couple of questions. For example, we all wonder why Euripides is mentioned in an epigram added to a Homeric text. Regretfully, I don't have the time to address these questions properly, and therefore I'd like to focus on another interesting aspect concerning the epigram. For this purpose, we need to make a time leap of about 500 years into the 6th century CE. In the first half of this century, the famous Codex Codicilianus was produced, originally containing the entire Pauline epistles. At its end, the following interesting text is to be found. Address. I am Coronis, the teacher of divine beliefs. If you lend me to someone, take a book as security, because borrowers are evil. Answer. I will keep you like a treasure of spiritual goods, object desired by all men, adorned with different beautiful letters. Yes, truly, I will not give you to anyone hastily, nor will I withhold the profit you offer from anyone. I will lend you only to my most trustworthy friends. Take another book as security. The text constitutes a dialogue between a Coronis, there is, however, no actual Coronis drawn on the page, and the owner of the manuscript. The Coronis asks the owner not to lend the book to anyone unless another book is offered as security. The owner tries to calm the Coronis down by emphasizing his strong appreciation towards the book and by promising not to give it away carelessly. The author of the dialogue probably considered it a prose text. However, the words uttered by the Coronis clearly originated from a model in iambic trimedes. That is because, despite the rephrasing, the text still iterates much of the original iambic word material. Moreover, if we compare the first part of the dialogue to the Coronis epigram in the London papyrus, some obvious textual parallels become apparent. From this, I think we can conclude that the dialogue is an adaptation of our Coronis epigram, or a similar text at least. Apparently, the author of the dialogue recycled the word material of what might have been a popular book epigram at the time and adapted it to a new context. So, in the last few minutes of my talk, I'd like to address the aspect of visual representation, which is crucial to the study of Byzantine book epigrams. In fact, in their overview article, Florie Bernard and Christophe de Moon have devoted a separate chapter to this aspect. There, they discuss two main features concerning the visual appearance of book epigrams. First, copyists frequently choose a special script to make a book epigram stand out. The most monumental one clearly was the so-called epigraphische Auszeichnungsminuskel, which was adopted from stone inscriptions. Secondly, book epigrams were often closely connected to miniatures. As I will demonstrate, these strategies are already attested for ancient book epigrams. Let's turn again to the Coronis epigram in the London papyrus and focus this time on its visual appearance. As you see on the figure offered by Malm, the text of the epigram consists of a rectangular text block of 9 lines of roughly the same length, from 13 to 16 letters, framed by 2 horizontal undulating strokes at the top and bottom. Every line ends at more or less the same point, thus filling up the whole surface within the borders. for some reason, in line 1, 5, and 6, wedge-shaped line fillers were used. Whoever penned the epigram was very much concerned with its layout and visual appearance. What strikes me as particularly significant in this context is the epigram's resemblance to stone inscriptions. First, according to Milne, the text is written in an artificial square hand of epigraphic type, which differs from the scribe type used for the main text and literary text of this period in general. Second, as you may have noticed, the epigram's layout does not respect the metric structure of the poem written in the iambic trimeter. In fact, sometimes new line even occurs in the middle of a word. This is a rather unusual way of presenting an epigram in a book, but the typical way for epigrams chiseled and stone. Third, the epigram ends with an imperative to the reader, extra metrum, apeche, keep away. Again, this is quite a common phenomenon in stone epigrams, where one can read expressions extra metrum like chairete or tharsei. Usually, in the case of stone epigrams, the text extra metrum is separated from that of the actual poem. Not infrequently, however, the transition from the poem to the text extra metrum is blurred, as it is true for our Coronis epigram. To sum it all up, it seems that the scribe who penned the epigram was much concerned with its visual appearance, as he wanted it to stand out. To achieve this, he seems to have deliberately chosen features typical for stone inscriptions. In doing so, he did not only emphasize the epigram's paratextual character, but also its very nature as epigramma, as inscription. Due to the lack of further evidence, we cannot establish how common the application of epigraphic features was in such contexts. It is nevertheless striking that the epigraphic character of the Coronis epigram is paralleled by the visual appearance of later Byzantine book epigrams. In fact, many Byzantine book epigrams produced as early as in the 9th century imitate the layout of contemporary stone inscriptions, so using an epigraphic scribe type and special ornamentation. In the Laurentianus Pluteus 5.9, for example, a 9th century codex of the Book of Prophets, the poems were written in epigraphische Auszeichnungsminuskel with golden ink and framed with a decorative border. Moreover, every line ends in more or less the same point, thus filling up the whole surface within the borders. Yet, there are even more elaborate forms of presenting a book epigram, as the following examples shows. It is found in the so-called Vienna Dioscurides, a lavishly illuminated codex dated to the 6th century and containing Dioscurides de Materia Medica with some other scientific text. On folio 6 verso, a dedicatory image of Ancia Juliana is depicted. What strikes as particularly significant is the fact that an epigram in iambic dimeters is enclosed within the miniature. The text, which is nowadays only barely visible, is situated in the inner sides of the octagonal frame which surrounds Ancia Julia's portrait. So the epigram, the single lines are written here surrounding the portrait. The text itself is a dedication in the form of an acrostic, which repeats the name of the dedicatee given in the 8 star points. Juliana, which in the 8 star points, which gives the form Juliana. The text reads as follows. Hail, O princess! Honorata extols and glorifies you with all fine praises for the magnanimity of the Anki to whose family you belong, allows you to be mentioned over the entire world. You have built a temple of the Lord, raised high and beautiful. Here, epigram and miniature are characterized by a kind of symbiotic relationship, as the epigram is absorbed, so to speak, by the image itself. Hence, the Vienna Dioscorides forms an impressive example for the close connection between book epigram and miniatures, which we can also observe in many later Byzantine manuscripts. In conclusion, in this paper, I focused on the aspect of continuity between the ancient and Byzantine book epigram tradition, for which I provided 3, hopefully illustrative examples. First, I discussed the evidence for the ancient scribe-related book epigram. As my analysis of Opithius' lines showed, the preoccupations reflected in these epigrams did not essentially differ from those of the Byzantine copyists. Secondly, I addressed the aspect of textual fluidity and provided you with an example that demonstrates the textual recycling of book epigrams was already an ancient phenomenon. Thirdly, I analyzed the visual representation of 2 book epigrams and pointed out the parallels with the relevant Byzantine tradition. Even though these 3 aspects don't offer a comprehensive picture, I hope that my paper gave you at least an impression of the close relation between the ancient and Byzantine book epigram tradition. In this respect, certainly much further research has to be done, and hopefully my talk gave some stimulus for a close examination of the chronological margins of the Byzantine book epigram. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Simon. It was indeed very stimulating, thought-provoking. Are there any questions from the audience? You can raise your virtual hands from the reactions button, or wave at me. I try to okay, I guess I will start by saying something, but I encourage you, everyone very much to interrupt me. Thank you again, Simon. It was very interesting. I mean, I feel at first that I have to make a bit of an apology on behalf of the DBBE because of our use of Byzantine book epigram, right? I mean, in the sense that I believe we know that many of our epigrams are not necessarily authored by Byzantine authors, but they are Byzantine in the sense that they appear in Byzantine manuscripts and were probably selected and designed to appear there by Byzantine individuals. But yet again, you showed us how actually, yes, as you said, characteristics of Byzantine book epigrams as mostly connected with the materiality of writing. For example, this Coronis epigram, which is very interesting, and the physical dimension of writing as well, with the pains of the Styxis process are present even in not only date from ancient periods, but also are present in ancient materials, that is papyri. So being said all that, I guess my question has little to do with that introduction, but I would like to ask you if you, because I'm also inspired by our last talk by Renat, if you're considering in gathering all this material, in putting it together, not as an analysis, but as a catalog or a database, let's say.
So thank you very much. Since there are not that many ancient book epigrams, at least I was able to identify, and it's around 40 maybe. So I will try to include them in some way or other in my book, but I'm not planning to produce a database, because I think it is necessary for such a few epigrams.
Thank you. I see hand raised. Yes, first Benedict, then Floris, maybe. Please, Benedict.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that that extremely stimulating, interesting paper. I was just fascinated by these Coronis epigrams. I haven't encountered them before. I expect there's been sort of a lot of scholarship. Well, I don't know how much scholarship there may have been on them already. I mean, this they must have connected them, I suppose, with Meleager's very famous Coronis epigram, and so I suppose my question was, well, in part, is there a suspicion that these are inspired by Meleager's epigram that perhaps closed the garland? And also this fascinating epigraphic form that you so illuminatingly pointed out, could that derive from him as well? Because there seems to be a very intricate play there between the very literary format of a papyrus roll ending with a coronis, and of course the inscriptional origins of epigram that would have appealed a great deal to Meleager. Is that something that might derive, might originate with him possibly?
So thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear you very well, but I think you asked me what are the connections or the parallels are between Meleager's epigram closing the garland and the Coronis epigram in question. I'm right?
Yes, indeed. I'm sorry for my audio quality.
No worries, no worries. So of course, I think there is a kind of connections between them, but it's difficult to say in what it consists. So was Meleager inspired by such Coronis epigrams, or was our Coronis epigram inspired by Meleager? This the question is difficult to answer. So of course, Meleager's epigram is attested before, because here we are in the 1st century CE, and I think we can only speculate. But given the fact that we have this Corona epigram attested more or less twice, once in the London papyrus, and later in the Codex Coelianus in a recycled form, and of course the Codex Coelianus didn't took it from the London papyrus. So I think it was quite a popular book epigram, and so I tend to believe that maybe it was already popular in the 1st century BC, and then I think it could be that Meleager was inspired by such a kind of Coronis epigrams. But of course, I can't. No one can tell it for sure.
No, indeed. that's very fair. I suppose what might not have come through in the audio, what particularly intrigues me is the epigraphic form in which it's presented in the Iliad papyrus, and how neither that fits in with Meleager's interests in the sort of the transition of epigram from epigraphic from stone formats into the literary form, and it just seems wonderfully ironic to put it in this form, and whether perhaps that presentation might originate with Meleager. But you're right that it's pure speculation, I suppose.
Again, here, I think it's difficult to say anything which is certain. Personally, I would believe that Meleager wrote his, because the Meleager epigram in some kind is part of the Garland. It's still part of the Garland, it's still epigram. And so it's a paratext like that one, but considered a text. And I think originally it was penned in the same ways as the epigrams before, not having a special form or something like that. While this one is clearly a paratext, and I think that whoever penned it down had in mind that it's still, as a paratext, it is inscribed, and it is not a text but an inscription, an epigram, and maybe from there he took the idea that it should also get a kind of epigraphic form, as we know from the Byzantine examples. I think I can't tell you more.
No, indeed, that's very fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Floris, you were waiting.
I wanted basically to agree with you, Julian, and then thanking Simon for providing us this dimension of Byzantine book epigrams, because I think that in our perspective, sometimes, I mean, we have been forgetting where these epigrams came from and their cultural background in antiquity. And as just one example, I mean, we have always been I think imagining book epigrams as something of a book and then literally of a codex. And now you are showing us examples of you cannot call it otherwise than book epigram occurring in a papyrus on a scroll. So this I think really changes also our perspective on what a book epigram is. And perhaps my question would be is whether you see, of course, these continuities. Perhaps whether you see some also significant breaks or not when papyrus gradually changes into the dominant format, changes into codex, or whether you think that this change of format was actually rather insignificant in the development of the book epigram genre. That would be my first intuitive question. Then, of course, I mean, whether you are trying to see also the ancient book epigram as a very, very broad genre, then perhaps it becomes possible to find many more examples. You have this group of epigrams in the Palatine anthology of scribes who are dedicating their writing materials to a god and saying, okay, now I'm retiring and I'm very happy to do so. I'm wondering how broad your definition can be of the ancient book epigram. These would be my two questions. But perhaps, I mean, especially the first one is very difficult to answer, and but thank you for providing us this perspective on the genre of book epigrams in any case.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. So I try to say something on your first question on the aspect of continuity now regarding the shift from papyrus scrolls to codices. and that is indeed very difficult to answer. I think that what I know at the moment, I would say that, let's say, in the early period, Hellenistic epigrams we have from the Hellenistic period, they're mostly what I would call purely literary. They are written by poets like Callimachus, Asclepiades, and I think that from the beginning on, they have been written just for being read as with literary pleasure, part of epigram books, and have no real connection to a book in the sense of a paratext. If we look more on these on epigrams now collected in the Pattern Anthology, which regarding their form indicate that they originally were planned to be paratext. If you look at those, I think we can see that most of that they are paratext to texts which are quite late. And like the Orpheus epigram, for example. I think that the Codex, now to come back to your question, that the Codex formed a kind of catalysator to the production of book epigrams. So it made it maybe facilitated the production of them, or gave a better format. So I think if you consider the real paratexts, the real book epigrams, I think most of them might have been written on codices, while the ones have the book scroll as a background, as a fictional background. And to your second question regarding the definition. So I have a rather clear definition on book epigrams, which is I consider book epigrams which are either inscriptions on a book or posing as such. So I wouldn't include the epigrams you mentioned as book epigrams, because they deal with writing material, but they're not really them inscribed in a book. But the question you raise is very good, because if you look at the ninth book of the Pattern Anthology, where book epigrams are collected, it is difficult to say if such an epigram, let's say, praising an author, once it is part of the Pattern Anthology, we have no clue in knowing where it came from. So it could be that this epigram was inscribed originally on a book, or was originally planned to be inscribed on a book, but it could also be that it was inscribed for a statue or bust for the same author. So it's very difficult, and I think there are many more book epigrams in the Pattern Anthology, but we can't say for sure that they were. And I focused on those where the connections to the book context is made explicit by pronouns or by explicitly referring to the book. That's what. Therefore, maybe I have fewer epigrams than you expected.
Yeah, right. I see. I think that's very sensible. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your answer. And indeed, I mean, what we often see in our corpus is that the format of the codex seemed to have been like very, let's say, inviting or very productive for the production of book epigrams. because there's just also sometimes this space that you have in a book. So I would think, I'm really no specialist, but I would think that on a papyrus scroll, you don't have that much empty space also between sections to fill it with epigrams. So I would agree with you and say that the contexts would be a little bit less inducive to the production of that charm. But it exists as you have shown us. So that's already a very important element.
Right. Are there? I think we can accommodate one more little question, if anyone would like to pose. Okay. So otherwise, I think we will finish for today. Not without advertising our next lecture on Tuesday, 16 November. Ottavia Mazzon will talk about hidden paratexts, the transmission of paratextual elements within collection of excerpts. And not without thanking once again Simon for the talk and for the audience on the other side of the screen. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you very much for the discussion, and hope to see you soon somewhere.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.